Oh, my plans are on it. Let's try.
Is that better? Okay, good. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it sometimes Chrome does that. It switches the mic when I'm in a Hangout. All right. Well, we are now broadcasting live now that we've got some microphone microphone issues sorted out. Now I hope there's no mic shorting out. And let's go ahead and start the show. Thank you, everyone who's tuning in live. Hello and welcome back to the Food Fight Show. Today's episode is all about the recent changes to Habitat, our open source application automation platform. Try saying that 10 times fast, including the Habitat Builder SaaS platform and a new Habitat Kubernetes integration. I'm Nell Shamrell-Harrington. I am one of the co-hosts of Food Fight. I'm a senior developer at Chef, also a proud member, I might add, of the Habitat team. My co-host Nathen Harvey is in an airport somewhere in Detroit and unfortunately cannot join us today, but he sends his best regards to all of our listeners. And with me, we have Tasha Drew. Hello, Tasha. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, I'm the product manager for Habitat.
Awesome. We are glad to have you here. And also with us are Jamie Winsor. Hi there, Jamie.
Hey, thanks for having me, Nell. I'm the co-author and architect of Habitat.
Awesome. It is good to have you here. And if any of you out in YouTube land are watching us live and you'd like to ask some live questions while we're on the air, go ahead and head into the Chef community Slack. That's at community-slack.chef.io and join in the Food Fight channel. And if you have questions or comments, we just might read them on air. All right, so let's go into a few announcements before we get into the meat of the show. And let's talk about ChefConf. ChefConf this year, it's been announced, is May 23rd through 26th in the beautiful, windy city of Chicago. I am personally going to try to get a group outing going to see the production of Hamilton that is permanently playing in Chicago. So if you're interested in that and you're in the planning on going to ChefConf, feel free to send me a tweet. The most important thing to mention right now is that the call for proposals, the CFP, is open until Wednesday, January 10th. And we want to make sure the entirety of the chef community is represented in our speaker lineup. So please get your proposals in. I spoke at last year's ChefConf, so did Jamie, come to think of it. And it's always a great experience for the speakers at ChefConf, as well as all the attendees. If you'd like more information on ChefConf, head on over to chefconf.io for all the details. And with those announcements out of the way, let's go ahead and go into the main show. So one of the most intriguing things that came out from the Habitat team this year is the new Habitat SaaS platform. Jamie, would you like to tell us a little more about that?
Absolutely. We've been hard at work. This has been a couple months now that we had launched, but hard at work for a number of months leading up to October to bring the first iteration of the hosted build service for everyone. It's called Builder. You can get there by going to habitat.sh, clicking on Builder, logging in, linking your GitHub profile up, going through a quick tutorial. It takes about 10 minutes. And at the end of it, what you'll have is a Habitat plan inside of a GitHub repository that has some source code in it, representing a Node app. You link that up to a job inside of Builder. It auto builds that software, and if any changes happen underneath the software below it that it depends upon, say Node, the version of Node changes, it will automatically rebuild your software and put that back into an unstable channel. Great thing about Builder is, as I said, it's free for everyone to use right now. Please give us as much feedback as you can. We're trying to make this a live, growing service, and anyone can use it, like I said. All the core plans are up there. You connect a supervisor, start a supervisor up, start a package, point it to Live Builder, and it will auto-update that software as you promote things between channels. You could also export packages that were built with Habitat into Docker containers and publish those up to Docker Hub, which is one of the first exporters that we built, and pulled out that Docker container, schedule it with Kubernetes, We also just recently added additional support for the Amazon Elastic Container Registry, if that's the flavor you prefer. But that's the basics of what we launched last.
I know it's always very hard to keep up with the plethora. Did I say that right? Yeah, it's plethora,
Yes.
not plethora. The plethora of announcements coming out of AWS reInvent, but that was one of my favorite ones that came out of that. Is now straight from Builder. You can export your package into the Amazon Elastic Container Registry. We've been saying for a long time that you can use the container images with Kubernetes, with Azure Container Services, whatever you want to do with them, but that required a manual step on the user of Habitat's part. And now you can export it straight from Builder. Jamie, I just want to recall an event during the last out. We were working late nights trying to get the SaaS platform across the finish line. And this moment of just pure joy. The first time we built Builder with Builder. Would you like to say something about that?
Absolutely. So at Chef, we use all of our own software that we build. It's really easy to do so. We build software to make developers' lives easier. Of course, we're developers as well. We use our own software. The same is true for the Habitat team. All of Builder is run with Habitat supervisors. Those supervisors run Builder. Builder is the build service. It builds the supervisor. It also builds itself. And what Nell's talking about is you finally put the final piece in place after working on this. Builder's been in development for over a year now, or little parts of Habitat's 2.5 years or so, little parts of Builder in the beginning, or what eventually turns into Builder, but largely the majority of that work had been done in about a year and a half. And there was a moment right maybe 3-4 days before launch where everything was finally completely done. We had pushed it all out to production, and we literally just pressed the build button on, like, say, the API server component, and the supervisors pick up so Builder builds itself, publishes the build back into itself. The supervisors, which are running Builder, find out about the update. They auto-update themselves, and they do it in a rolling fashion. And basically, it's a no-outage deployment of one of the components of Builder, and you can do it with each of them. Right after that, what I think is even more impressive is Builder built the supervisor, and then the supervisors running Builder all auto-update themselves without an outage as well, because leading up to this launch, we had prepared the supervisor, or the client, to be stateless enough that it will update services and continue services running through the update of the supervisor itself. So basically, it's completely self-hosted. We all use our own software. We all use our own core packages, and we do that to make sure that the quality stays high, and we're not making stuff that people don't want.
We just had a comment in the Food Fight Slack channel of the Chef Community Slack from Romain Sertalan. I apologize if I said your name incorrectly, but he is one of our prominent community members, and he just called this the Habception. So I don't think I can actually use a sound clip from Inception because of copyright laws, but let's just all imagine the brah sound being inserted into here. All right, let's go over to you, Tasha. Would you like to say some things about the Habitat Builder SaaS? You were, I know, instrumental in getting this done, getting it prioritized, and getting it pushed across the border. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, sure. So basically, from my perspective, the cool thing about putting up Builder as an open SaaS is all of the components are open source. But what we're really doing is just putting it up for people to easily use and get started with, so that they can start to see how they can build their own application using Habitat, and then use the power of something someone else is hosting for them to start doing all of their rebuilds and start taking advantage of the fact that when they update their code on GitHub, if they've connected their code to Habitat Builder within their own private origin, they can then start to just automatically have their packages rebuilding for them, and then taking advantage of the automatic deploy piece where the supervisor sees it has an update from Builder in your development environment. Auto grabs that update, communicates with the other nodes running Habitat to say this is a good update, let's coordinate on how we're going to do this and install it, and then follow our update strategy according to how we're programmed. So all of that power is suddenly very easy and accessible for people to use. And then once you really get going, if you decide, hey, I would need to take this on-prem, or I want to dive more into the code, it's all on GitHub, you can check it all out. But the idea is just how do we get people started very quickly and with as little friction as possible. And so that's why I think this builder is a really cool thing to have up, and we'd love for people to check it out and give us feedback.
Speaking of feedback, Jamie and Tasha, I know all of us have been doing some customer on-sites, and I know we can't say who those customers are, at least most of them, but I'd love if you could talk a little bit about the reaction you've been getting both to Habitat and to Builder specifically when we're at those on-site engagements. Anything that's not NDA, that is.
Yeah, well, people are quickly putting their applications into Habitat more quickly, even more quickly than we've seen before, because the software is just maturing. We're building far less features when we go out and engage with a customer now, which is a really great sign of the software. We build all of our software at Chef, including Habitat, out of consumption. So we don't build it until someone needs it, even if we know we're gonna need it. So one of the very first customer on-sites we ever had, hooks were developed. It's also when we named them plans instead of builder files. By the way, Habitat used to be called Builder, which is funny because now they're build services Builder. Each shaped the supervisor or the service was built out of consumption and directed by a customer, pretty much, or a user. And like I said, the most recent ones, we are really just moving closer to a 1.0 release of this thing. And we're seeing that people are putting their software in real quick. They're understanding it a lot better. The documentation is there, better than it's ever been. Far less bugs in general. It's a lot better than it was 2 years ago when 2 years and 2 months ago when we did our first customer on site.
Yeah, we're kind of starting to live the continuous deployment and just-in-time dream. Over to you, Tasha. What have you been hearing?
Yeah, so I think some of the cool things that we've been seeing is how it starts to enable teams to be less afraid of making changes to their production environment. So one of the on-sites that we did recently, we had a developer team who had an application that they were responsible for that impacted a very large revenue-making service. And they wanted to run campaigns through their service based on the needs of the business, on demand, like let's do a deal, whatever. And they were all afraid to touch it. So every time they wanted to run a campaign, instead of someone simply just running this campaign, which sounds like a very simple tweak, they would have to get their senior Unix admin on the schedule to run it himself because everyone else was just terrified to touch it. And so using Habitat, we take that application, we expose the configurable variables that we want to be able to update on the fly, and then we build their packages for them. And then they just have to go in and set a configuration that can get gossiped around their ring and easily set these variables. And it really takes the fear out of doing these configuration changes out of their day, and it makes them all empowered to do these things on the fly. So just kind of seeing how we're reducing the complexity of these deployments and then also allowing people to change them when they need them without any risk is really cool to see. And also we have a bunch of videos from our last Chef Conf where customers that we did on sites with talked about how they're using Habitat, specifically GE Digital and a couple other shops. And so if you want to check those out, those should be on Chef's YouTube channel.
Awesome. Something I mentioned after the SaaS finally launched, it was 4 a.m. I was at SeaTac Airport. I was about to fly out to DevOps Days Hartford. And I just had a small joy because I discovered there is an all-night Qdoba in SeaTac, it turns out, which is far better than most breakfast airport food that you can find at 4 a.m. But I started to see some of the press releases go out about SaaS and then be picked up by other outlets, and it just roll out through the Twitterverse as more and more people woke up. And people ask me, what is it like to work in the tech startup world or the high tech world? And the answer I give them always is the highs are very high, the lows are awful. But seeing your work roll out like that across the internet, across your users, even people who are not your users yet, it was such a joy. So Tasha, you brought up Chef Conf last year, and I'd like to shift the conversation a little bit. So I'm remembering, and speaking of, life, even with technology, really is all about moments. But I'm remembering Kelsey Hightower gave, it may have been the last keynote at Chef Conf. It was definitely on the second day. And the night before, he had tweeted out, do people want me to change my keynote to address Habitat? And the answer overwhelmingly was yes. So he started off his keynote and he did a live demo, which was very, very brave. And he had integrated the Google voice system, OK Google. I don't know if that one has a name other than Google. And from his cell phone, he was able to activate a Kubernetes cluster running Habitat packages in one of the pods, and then using just his voice, update it to a new version. And I very rarely have seen this live. I've been to a lot of tech events, but everyone in the audience, number one, was paying attention. No one was looking at their laptop at that point. And two, just was slack-jawed, staring at what was going on the stage, regardless of whether they were a practitioner or, as some people at Chef say, a decision maker. Everyone was just sitting in awe at this demo of the Habitat technology and how it can be integrated. So that, I'd like to bring us to the Habitat Kubernetes integration, because even though Habitat, we know it did work with Kubernetes before. We saw Kelsey Hightower do it, a fantastic demo live on stage. I understand there's been some new things that happened in the Kubernetes integration. So Tasha, could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we want to do with Habitat and Kubernetes and Habitat and whatever you're using to deploy and manage the infrastructure and the clusters or the platform that you're deploying your application onto is just provide a really seamless experience. Habitat doesn't really want to have an opinion of what you're using. So that's why we provide things like a Docker exporter if you're using Docker. And then we provide a way to export the same workload to a VM if you need to work on a VM, bare metal, Cloud Foundry Docker exporter. So for Kubernetes specifically, we really wanted to nail the workflow of a Kubernetes user to have the ability to build and manage their application using Habitat, and then integrate with their Kubernetes cluster in a very native to Kubernetes way. So they're not having to change their workflow, but they're really getting the power of both systems together with like minimal friction. So what Kelsey showed was really awesome and was like the dream of both systems working together. And what we've been working on is the product to make that really rinse and repeat for a large number of users. And so one way that we've done that is to introduce the Habitat operator for Kubernetes. And so the reason we wanted to do an operator for Kubernetes is that really allows us to have the intelligence for the application, which is a big part of Habitat sort of worldview, is that it's your application, you know how it needs to behave. There are some sort of frameworks for how a lot of different applications behave, but at the end of the day, you, the application developer, know what's best for your application. So with the Habitat operator, we're letting that application logic live closer to your application than a higher level abstraction in Kubernetes. So basically with the operator, you can now have the operator running on your cluster and then have Builder building your application into Docker containers, which you can publish to ECR or to Docker Hub. And we also have a very specific Kubernetes exporter that will export a Docker container that also includes a Kubernetes manifest. And then you can deploy that to your running Kubernetes cluster. And then once it's up and running, it can connect back to Habitat. And then as you're rebuilding your application over time, it can connect to the different deployment channels, which we've sort of described before, but it's basically I rebuild my application automatically because an upstream dependency changed or because I committed a new change to my source code on GitHub. Habitat now rebuilds my application for me, posts it on an unstable channel. I may have a development cluster running Kubernetes, and the Habitat operator that is subscribed to that channel grabs that update, uses the deployment mechanism that I've specified in coordination with how Kubernetes understands how to do that deployment, deploys the pods. I now have that updated application running on my cluster with basically zero human intervention. So from a product perspective, like specifically what we have put out is this Habitat operator, this Kubernetes exporter, and then also integrating channel promotion with Kubernetes. Coming pretty soon is going to be basically the ability to choose to add a Kubernetes clusters as a publishing target. So you could publish your packages directly to a running cluster that already has the Habitat operator running on it. And then the other cool thing that I should mention is with the operator running on your cluster, it means that when you're using kubectl, or depending on which side of the argument you fall, kubectl, to administer your cluster, the operator keeps Habitat and Kubernetes in sync so that those changes local to the cluster don't get lost to Habitat.
I've always been in the kubectl camp myself, but I mean, mostly, well, it sounds like cuddle. And I mean, there's a lot of technologies I really don't want to cuddle with, but Kubernetes I'll cuddle with. It's really, really cool. I remember one of the things I've heard from people who use Kubernetes is one of the reasons they like it is, you know, if you're using a cloud provider, the higher level you go with that cloud provider and services, the harder it is to switch to another cloud provider or to do kind of a multi-cloud deployment if you need to. And I've heard one of the nice things about Kubernetes is it lets you bring that layer of abstraction those higher level services allow you to have, but it makes it easier to port that from cloud to cloud as needed.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of kind of what adopting Habitat as your build toolchain gives you is that when you have a workload that maybe either outgrows containers or you just have a tier of that workload that really belongs on bare metal or VM, you don't have to change the toolchain that you've adopted in order to start using that target. You can still build the exact same artifact, export it to the right format for the job that you're trying to do, and then keep going. So our kind of like concept there is that we're helping you future-proof how you're delivering your application and the services it depends upon by being really flexible in that export target.
I absolutely love that. I mean, as some of you know, and as some of our listeners know, I've worked tech on a number of political campaigns, and the surge in traffic right before election day or during a debate or something is enormous. And we often talk about the applications going from bare metal to the next iteration was virtual machines, the next iteration was containers. Sometimes even when you start in containers, the workload, the resources required by that application might grow to a level that's more appropriate to be on a VM or even more appropriate to be on bare metal. So Habitat doesn't lock you into one of them, which is one of my favorite parts about it. All right. Well, the last thing I'd like to cover in this podcast is something I've been working on a lot as part of my work with the Habitat team, and that is on scaffoldings. The idea of a scaffolding, currently at least, is to make it very, very easy to get started with Habitat. So let's say you are a node developer named Chris, we'll say, and you have your node application and you decide, all right, I want to try habitizing this and then putting it in a container. There's a great node scaffolding that will let you, with just a couple of lines of code, get that application into Habitat, and then Habitat will let you easily export it as a Docker container or any other container image. So the two main ones I've been working on are Node and Ruby. There are other ones that are in various states of being worked on. I know there's one for Go, and we've had some interest in having one for Python and Grail and a few others. So as the scaffoldings have grown, I realized, I think it was last week or the week before, that we needed to come up with some standards for what we expect a scaffolding to do and what we expect it to be able to give a user who uses that scaffolding, regardless of the language or platform that they use. So there's currently an RFC into the Habitat Core Plans repo. I will put a link to it in the show notes, which lays out the idea of a scaffolding should have both, or should both be able to compile static assets and have a runtime involved in it. If you'd like to get an idea of how we decide things like this on Team Habitat or in our open source Chef projects in general, we're very big on the RFC, or reason for change system. So what happens is someone opens a pull request saying, I want to change this, this is why, and then we can capture all the discussion about it in that specific pull request. So there's one open right now for node scaffolding, and I will put that link in the show notes. Jamie, Tasha, anything you'd like to say about scaffolding?
No, I think scaffolding, the idea of scaffolding, I think, is just to help people get started really quickly. We're always interested in adding more language stacks to scaffolding. It's definitely not going to fit every single application in the language stacks that we're providing. It's more if you've written a fairly vanilla Ruby application, Node application, Gradle application, let's use the patterns that we observe in that language community to fill in the defaults for you to get started with Habitat in your plan and your other configuration, and so that you can just keep going as quickly as possible to write and ship your application without really having to think about the initial config. For people who are using a language stack that is not a fully supported scaffolding, you're going to just have to write a plan instead. We have a lot of examples of plans, and we're making those very obvious on our website right now. So don't feel like you can't have an application in Habitat just because there's not a scaffolding. It's just an extra layer of automation to help people get started. And if you are trying to write a plan and you're having any trouble, please jump into our Slack channel, and we'd love to help you out. Very confident that we can help you build a plan in basically any language.
Awesome. And you mentioned the Habitat Slack channel. That is habitat-sh.slack.com. It's free to join. Anyone can join. The core maintainers are all in there. There's plenty of Habitat users in there, and we are learning from each other as we go. So I will put a link to that in the show notes as well. Jamie, anything you'd like to say about scaffoldings?
I think you guys hit exactly what they are, what they're supposed to be there for. One small addition is we really hope in the future that the core of how you build scaffolding improves in a way that it's much easier for people to add their own. That's a thing that we're going to be investigating at some point here in the near future. And once we get to that part, I hope to see, and I expect to see, quite a bit more selections for people to take off the shelf, and also a way for you to easily represent common patterns within applications that you have that are all very much the same. One of the things that we notice by going out to customer engagements is somebody may have like a C application, and they're all built the exact same way. One of the things that you may know about C or C++ is that some of the older languages, they don't have a common set of tooling like Rust does with cargo, or Clojure does with lining in, and so we hope to make that easier for you in the near future.
Awesome, that sounds good. Well, before we move on to picks, there's one more thing I'd like to ask you to, since I have you here kind of captive at the moment. And that is that we are very close to being at the end of 2017. It is now December 13th, 2017. And of course, at the end of the year, we see all the year in review blog posts on everything you can think of. But there's also a wonder of what are we going to be doing in the future. So could you two give us a little bit of a preview of what we might see from Habitat in 2018?
Yeah, in the beginning of the year, you're going to see a lot of stabilization, both in the hosted service and a march towards a 1.0 of the supervisor. One of the big changes that you'll see in the near future here is true concurrency within services in the supervisor. And what I mean by that is execution of lifecycle hooks. Right now, a service will start. It'll run its entire life cycle until it reaches the final piece, which is run. And then the next one will happen, then the next one will happen. And one of the downsides there is you can block execution of additional services if you sleep in a hook somewhere, basically. That's not the run hook. We'll be changing that and allow for that. Another thing that this unlocks is that the actual CLI, when it communicates to the supervisor, they'll be detached. And they'll be done in a way that allows for actual true synchronous commands to the supervisor, instead of what we do right now, which is write a file to the file system, pick it up, and it's like this asynchronous process. So scripting commands to Habitat's about to be a lot better. Through this process, we're also making the HTTP gateway that sits on as a sidecar of every supervisor much more robust. You can programmatically call that HTTP gateway if you have the authentication credentials to do so, to communicate to multiple supervisors at once, to have them all do a thing. So for instance, you won't need to be on the CLI saying stop service. You could literally broadcast a message to everything and say, I'd like you to do this. Those are some big things in the near future. Tasha, want to talk about a little bit future term?
Yeah, for sure. So a couple of the things that we're thinking about right now are around experience and application developers, and sort of how we can really enable people to move quickly with the complexity of a big production deployment. And so enabling developers to move fast and having like a really great local experience for them, where you can literally code, build, decide that what you have built is great for sharing with your teammates, share it on Builder, and then keep going with your day, maybe have it auto-deployed to a development cluster. That local experience is something that we're calling the developer studio, and that's something that we really want to start focusing on, is just how do we make that local development experience really fast, really powerful, and really fun. And so that's something that I think we're going to really be looking at in the new year. Something else that we're going to be looking at is, as an application developer, what do I need to be able to see? So we've kind of talked a lot about these continuous delivery concepts of, you know, I'm rebuilding my application, I'm putting it on a channel, I have a cluster subscribed to the channel, everything's updating, it's going through tests, it's really awesome. So what people really want to do is be able to see that instead of having more of a CLI experience. And so what we're thinking about is just what are really simple visualizations to give to our users so that they can see that process in real time and hit a button to start channel promotion and stuff like that. Another thing I'm really excited about is for us to continue our sort of cloud native journey, as far as really partnering with the CNCF and like sort of sharing and understanding what they've been building out with projects like Helm and Draft and a bunch of the Kubernetes and Pivotal space, Cloud Foundry space, and seeing how we can collaborate and really add to that ecosystem. So I think it's going to be cool.
That sounds fantastic. And we've had one more question from chat, which is neighborhood on the roadmap for 2018? And what it means by that is a self-hosted builder with, in quotation marks, custom auth.
Well, yes, it is.
That answer is good enough for me. All right. Well, I want to thank you two so much for joining me today. It's a joy to have you here on this podcast, and it's a joy to work with you two every day. I'd like to move on to the pick section as we close out the show. So what we do every show is we name a couple of things, whether it's technology tool or just something cool that has been useful to us, or something we've really enjoyed recently. So I'll go ahead and do mine first. And my first pick is Venmo. It's not really new, but I'm new to using it for sending payments back and forth. So as those of you who know me know, I love the theater. I love going to shows with friends, but coordinating I mean, we really don't want to buy tickets separately for them, because then you won't be sitting together and coordinating everyone paying whoever needs to go back with cash or check, or even some electronic systems is really confusing. Venmo makes it really, really easy to pay, and not only to pay. Like if I send a payment to my friend can then easily transfer that payment directly into her bank account. She doesn't have to leave it in the Venmo service. And as far as I know, there's not a fee for transferring that, but do double check on that. Don't take my word for it. And then my second pick is the series Orphan Black, which alas had its last season this year, but it was fantastic. And all 5 of its wonderful seasons are now available definitely on Amazon Prime and possibly some other services as well. It's an extremely smart sci-fi show featuring Tatiana Maslany playing, I think, 20 plus different versions of the same clone, and is without exaggeration when I say her performance, for me at least, is the best performance in the history of television. So if you're looking for something to do binge on over the holidays, I definitely recommend Orphan Black. Tasha, over to you.
Yeah, so the 2 things I am excited about right now, one is called Smart Nora, and I did find out about this from Oprah, but basically I may have purchased this for every male in my family. It's an insert for your pillow that, as you're sleeping, coordinates with your smartphone and changes the, so if you're snoring, it basically changes the angle of your head to help you stop snoring. And I'm pretty sure my immediate family doesn't listen to this, because if they do, I just ruined Christmas. But I am super excited to give that to everyone and see if it works or not. I hope it works. The other thing is Puzzle Fighter. It's a Capcom game. I found it like last week, and it has immediately become sort of my go-to on the iPhone. It's kind of like a weird Tetris, like combative Tetris, which is pretty entertaining, with Street Fighter characters in the back doing different power-ups.
Cool, that sounds very fun. And if Tasha's family ever listens to this, I hope you enjoy your smart Noras. Over to you, Jamie. What are your picks?
Mine are the movie that just came out called The Disaster Artist, which is a near 100. I never seen The Room, and then I still got it. It was amazing. It's a hilarious movie, also really well done. And my other is a restaurant that's closing here in Seattle, unfortunately, in the next couple of weeks. It's called Marcella's Creole Cookery. It's right near our office down here in Pioneer Square. I've been going to it for 5 years or something like this. They've been open forever. We've got a plaque from my last company at a table. It's our table. And they're closing. So if you happen to come through Seattle, you should check it out before they close.
I can vouch that it's a great restaurant, and I am shedding a tear that it is closing. I suppose this brings us to the point where, all good things come to an end. So I want to thank you again, Jamie and Tasha, for joining me today, and remind everyone to check out chefconf.io for information on ChefConf in the beautiful Windy City of Chicago, and to get your call for proposals in. And with that, I'm going to close this out, and happy holidays, everyone, and have a wonderful new year.